Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar series, A Senior's Guide to Building a Modular ADU. This is part 5 of 10, titled Plot Plan and Map Work, Determining the Location and Orientation of Your ADU. This is brought to you by Mr. John Aronson, President and owner of Crest Backyard Homes, and myself, Jeremy Knock, President and owner of Golden Age Financial Solutions. What this series will do is take you from the initial idea of the ADU through the certificate of occupancy using the HECM loan to maximize cash flow. We're bringing this to you every Tuesday and Saturday from 10 a.m. to 10:30. Sessions will be recorded and available to share and watch later, and we encourage you to do so. So, FYI, just real quick, you can adjust the size of your webcam there there's a little bar on there. You can make it much smaller just so that you can see more of the presentation. Now, we break this into 2 parts. We do the first part, it's about a 20-minute information section, and then at the end, we do about a 10-minute Q&A portion. We will be addressing all the questions at the end of the portion. Now, if you do have a question in the meantime, there's a little question panel. Just click that, type in your question, and we'll just answer them in the order that they come in. So today, we will be exploring specifically how to use the plot plan and the topo to finalize the location and orientation of your ADU. That being said, John, could you give us a brief review of what the topo is and what's on it?
Yes, sir. To review, the topo, or also topographical map, also known, the acronym is topo, delineates your boundaries, your property lines, setbacks, public and private easements, as well as any utility easements. It also shows the location of your existing main utility feeds and contour lines, also known as gradients, which are variations in the terrain such as flat areas, inclines, hills, slopes, and banks. However, it may or may not indicate all the structures, but any on the property at the time the topo was done will show their location. Most importantly, the topo will let you know, based on the location you wish to place your ADU, just how large it can be and most suitable orientation on your property.
So that being said, John, could you tell us why is the topo and the plot plan so critical in the decision-making process?
Yeah, it confirms your boundaries and lot lines.
Well, I know we keep touching on those, but why are they so important?
Well, boundaries and lot lines delineate extreme outer limits of your property. If those starting points are wrong, then all your measurements for accurate placement on your backyard home will be wrong. And that could be a very costly mistake.
Yes, it can. Now, can you talk us through the setbacks a bit more specifically?
Sure. The setbacks are the distances you're allowed to build from the front and back and both sides of your property. Now, the new ADU laws are set the maximums at 4 feet, regardless of what your local jurisdiction says. In fact, local jurisdictions need to be complying with that right now.
Okay, so what about existing structure setbacks?
Well, based on the new laws, you can go less than 4 feet. In fact, existing permanent structures can actually help fit the ADU on a particular spot where they would have worked against us in the past.
How so?
The setbacks used to be farther away from the lot lines, specifically. Now, if a permanent structure exists, we don't have any setback requirements from those, and that includes side streets and alleys.
And what about easements?
Easements are rights of way that your neighbors and others may use to cross your property. They're also used by utility companies to access main, water, gas, sewer, and telecom lines should they be on your property. You definitely don't want to build too close over these because you are going to end up having to tear it down if the utility companies ever needed access.
That sounds expensive. So how do encroachments factor into this?
Well, encroachments are a violation of you or your neighbor's property, and they can go either way. Your neighbors may have a fence, building, or tree on part of your property or you on theirs. And surveys will usually resolve these types of disputes.
And this is why we stress so much that even though you don't need one, it's really recommended to get one. So lastly, tell us about the environmental areas.
Well, yeah, this is really important. These areas are preserved and protected by city, county, state, federal, coastal, and any other environmental entities. They must be observed and are strictly enforced. They're basically zero tolerance on those.
Yeah, I hear you. So with all these in mind, make sure, folks, consider the end user and whether it's going to be you, your family, or a renter.
Yeah, these are deciding factors between where you want to build the ADU or orientation and size and where it can actually be built.
Now, John, can you take us through the specific details of the topo a little bit more?
Sure, it's going to delineate where all the lot lines are, and these lot lines will determine possible locations and orientations for the ADU.
What makes the lines so important in the overall estimations?
Well, your property lines, setbacks, easements, and any and all encroachments in environmentally sensitive and protected areas will determine where exactly where you can and cannot. That's most important. Build your backyard home or locate it, let's say.
Okay, well, how does this affect size limitations?
Well, possible locations determine size limits of the ADU because of those setbacks. Now, if you have unlimited space, you don't have to worry about it. If you're on a large parcel of land, the sky's the limit. But you can only work with the space you have. Choosing a different location on the property will still have its own limitations regarding the setbacks. This can also limit the size of the ADU.
So can you tell us how the specific location can also be affected by other considerations?
Yeah, specifically locations will determine the accessibility for the ADU, and accessibility will determine the crane size as well as the rigging and staging areas that will be needed.
So any other special considerations to think about?
Most definitely. The first is the staging area, or in some instances, areas. Accessibility will determine the most viable staging area for the crane. As a modular ADU, basically can only be set by a crane.
And what next?
Traffic control. The crane along with the fleet. I mean, and it can be a big fleet. If it's a big crane, you can have multiple vehicles, rigging trucks, equipment, and the toter, which is what hauls the ADU components to the site, will no doubt require some form of traffic control if the lot is on or near a busy intersection or blocking a lane of traffic, say.
I hear you. So I just want to point out a couple of things, folks. We chose this picture because if you look at this, if you pay close attention, you can see right here, there's a bunch of high trees. You can see in the background, there's overhead power lines, and they go quite high. Here, you've got a very small access way for a staging area. You've got hardscape that you don't want to damage, and then you've got existing structures on the property that you wouldn't want to damage. So there's actually an alley right back here that you can't quite see. So it's got access to drop the ADU right here on this piece of land. But just also note, there's a fairly decent grade right here that's going to put the ADU slightly higher than the actual home. So it's a wonderful picture to really give you an idea of how much can really be going on in just one little snapshot. So John, it's definitely, there's quite a few things like you guys are looking at all at once.
Yeah. We also have to pay really close attention to any overhead power lines. Depending on the distance from the crane, they may require temporary disconnects, and that can be a real challenge. If your property is close to overhead power lines, which is often the case, any neighbors impacted will have to be notified, as they could be without power for hours. And you may have people on ventilators and things like that. So then there's water and gas too. We're not likely to always impact your neighbors. You may very likely have to do a temporary disconnect on your gas, water, maybe even sewer, while connecting those utilities from your primary grid to your backyard home service.
So that being said, John, could you walk us through some more of the specific details of the actual plot plan?
Yeah, well, let's start by taking a close look at the plot plan first.
What are the key details you're looking for?
Specifically, we're looking for the exact location of all the structures. Some structures may not even appear on the topo, depending on when the topo was done and the structures were located on the property. The finished plot plan will show the location of all the current structures on the property, whether they're permanent or not. It also shows the exact dimensions of any and all structures and fixtures, such as attached or detached garage, a shed, pool, or workshop.
And what will those specifics help us do?
Well, they're going to give us a starting point to help us pick out a proposed location for the backyard home. We'll plug the proposed ADU structure onto the plot plan showing the desired orientation and dimensions.
So what if you encounter anything that doesn't fit in the setback requirements?
We'll start to move the location around first. We'll try to tweak it as little as possible in order to get it as close as we can to the most desired location and orientation.
So folks, there's a lot of math here, and then there's also some really educated guessing to start with. And then once you do that, there's a lot more estimations. But once you have the initial estimating done, what else can we play with to get it into the exact spot we want?
Boy, estimate is definitely it, or guesswork is definitely plays a lot into it as well. Then we go to the dimensions of the ADU. We're really looking for where the flexibility is in the design. If we can potentially shorten it by a few inches or slide it over a few inches, we'd rather do that.
So what's the next most common factor in the dimensions of the ADU?
It's going to be all about the budget. And this is why we keep recommending starting with the HECM loan process first. It's a huge waste of time and money to be this far in the process and not have a solid footing of what you can afford to spend.
That's right, folks. So this is going to be determined by your net available funds from your HECM loan and then any other cash contributions you wish to add. So John, what else are we looking for right now?
Well, we're going to be looking heavily at your desired timeline and start date. And it's important to work within the start date and a time the delivery of your backyard home to coincide with the finished site preparation.
Why is that so important right now?
Well, we won't even order the home from the factory until you have your permit in hand. Then, depending on the dynamics of your site preparation, we'll hold off on the delivery of the home until the site is prepared to accept it. Nothing's going to be worse than having an ADU show up before the site's been completely prepared to receive it. Believe me, the homeowner will pay the flat price on that one.
I hear you. So how is the timeline affected at the factory?
Well, what really stalls production time is demand, basically, which is predicated largely on seasonality. Generally, the farther you get into the spring and summer months, the longer the production time. Now, it can go from 4 to 6 weeks in the off season to 6 to 12 weeks very quick when the season starts rolling. When the snow starts thawing, put it that way.
I hear you. So some of you folks, this may seem a little self-explanatory, but John, can you tell us how the location can limit the size of the ADU?
Well, it's going to come down to flexibility the client has in mind. If there's only one exact location and orientation that will fit on the lot, then the only flexibility we have is the size of the footprint of the ADU.
So do you have any ways to get back up to the desired usable square footage if the footprint is limited?
Yeah, if the client is open to another location and or orientation, we can also build up. Should your lot, if your lot's not large enough to achieve your goals, we could do a two-story modular, but only if your local jurisdiction will permit them. Keep in mind, some jurisdictions and communities do have height limitations, especially if you're in an HOA.
So this is why we recommend folks you decide on the most important factors to you as early in the process as possible. Then just be prepared to be flexible in your approach. The site reality becomes more clearly.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it any better, Jeremy. So now let's, why don't you walk us through some of the existing structure requirements?
Well, these will play a critical role in the ADU placement. However, these, like John said, can now actually help you.
How's that?
Well, the California state law is that a property line setback is 4 feet. They can't, local jurisdictions can't allow or require you to go more than that. However, with existing permitted structures, setbacks can now be less than 4 feet. Where those used to hurt the ADU placement because of bigger setback requirements, they can now help us squeeze one into a much smaller lot now.
So what about things like side streets or alleys?
Side streets and alleys are included as existing structures. You will have to pay close attention to your local easement requirements, though.
Well, remember, folks, the local jurisdiction setback requirements can be less than, but never quite more than, the state law mandates. Now, that being said, Jeremy, could you talk us through assessing the proposed ADU location?
Well, there's a lot of due diligence. So after that's performed, now you have some of the potential locations that we were discussing. But only now can you really start to narrow down the actual maximum and minimum size of the ADU. And because budget influences this choice so much, as well as the orientation, you will do very well to keep the end user in mind.
What about the other parts of the build out?
You really want to keep your hardscape wish list in mind and in accordance with the end user. Things like an outdoor kitchen or an outdoor barbecue area, as well as things like a patio deck or other stairs.
And those types of choices really push up long-term rent potential and keep vacancies low, I would assume.
Yes, absolutely they do. So I also want to remind folks, just make sure you plan for parking requirements with a driveway or carport, as well as space for things like an awning. And then also just remember basic accessibility here too.
So what are the variables we can bend and shape with all this?
Well, we start with what the state will allow. So California state minimum says that local jurisdiction must allow at least an 800 square foot ADU. Now, if it's greater than one bedroom, you must allow at least a 1,000 square foot ADU. That really means 2 or more bedrooms. The state maximum says 1,200 square feet.
So if the local jurisdiction says you can go bigger than the state minimums or maximums, you can use those as well, or you can refer to the local jurisdictions.
That's right. You can always go whatever the bigger of the two is. So here we also don't want to leave out, keep in mind, the ADA compliance here, excuse me. So for exterior, what you're looking for is space for things like ramps, lifts, parking, railings. For the interior, you're looking at widths of hallways, doorways, pocket doors, and then things like bathrooms. Specifically in relationship from the sink to the bathtub and the commode. And then you'll also want to think about things like grab rails.
Well, even if you don't need these things right now, or initially, you'll want to plan for them at this point. This is the place to do it, not later. Setting up your ADU now to handle any future physical challenges will be critical to your aging in place strategy. Today, you may be wanting to rent out your ADU, but in 5 years, you may need more cash flow than the ADU will bring in. This may be the time to consider moving into the ADU yourself and rent out your primary residence in order to get increased rent. Believe me, you'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. So speaking of having it now, Jeremy, can you help us get an even better understanding of how the HECM loan actually works?
Of course, John. So folks, remember, first and foremost, this is an FHA insured line of credit. You don't pay any interest on money you don't use. Now, if you look at the graph here on the right, that remaining line of credit is your line that is growing, not your balance. So if you choose to never use this available line of credit, even though you have access to it, doesn't mean you owe money on it. So you don't pay a penny of interest on that available line.
Can you tell us a little more about how the HECM line of credit actually works in terms of use?
Sure. Well, just like any other line of credit, you can use it, pay it back, and use it again. The biggest difference, and one of its biggest benefits, is that it can never be reduced or revoked, regardless of the value of the home. The other biggest key benefit, again, regardless of the value of the home, is that this unused portion grows over time.
Wow. So what would someone do with the remaining line of credit?
So that's where some more planning and strategy comes in. Do you let it grow for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? I mean, look at what this is the line at inception. And remember, based on this scenario, you've already got $150,000 in cash to build the ADU. You fund it at 210. In 10 years, it's 315,000. And in 20 years, it's nearly $500,000. So here's where you start to think, do you build an additional ADU with this money? Can you potentially build an even bigger ADU than you originally planned on? Now, I bring that up because in San Diego, you can command anywhere from an extra $800 to $1,000 in rent per month per bedroom. So if you're thinking about a 1-bedroom and you can afford to do a 2 or a 3-bedroom, that would just make sense.
Whoa. So what about timing of building an additional ADU?
Well, that all comes down to more strategic planning. Do you want to do them at the same time? Do you want to stagger the start dates? This is all going to come down to your capacity to handle it. But that's why working with someone like Crest and having that professional in your corner really makes that process very simple. Now, one thing I do want to point in mind, folks, you may need a little extra time to let the HECM line of credit grow for maybe a year or 2 or 3 in order to be able to do an additional 1 or even 2 more ADUs.
Well, remember, folks, these options are all situation specific. We can discuss that in greater detail with a one-on-one conversation.
Exactly, John. I completely agree with that. And that's, these are much more personal, individual questions, and I'd love to be able to answer some of those folks. So that being said, in closing, if you have specific questions for the ADU, please reach out to Crest Backyard Homes. Their website is www.crestbackyardhomes.com. Go to the site, find their contact page, and fill it out. One of the representatives will be in contact with you shortly. If you have specific questions for the HECM loan, please reach out to Golden Age Financial Solutions. Their website is www.goldenaf, that's A as in Apple, F as in Frank.com. Go to the site, find the contact page, and fill it out. One of the reps will call you shortly. Now, keep in mind, folks, these sessions are recorded, so you can watch them over and over again, share them with your friends and family, and please do so. Now, make sure to join us for our next webinar on this coming Saturday. Don't forget to register. Be on the lookout for that next link. Now, just before we open it up to questions, we have a huge announcement. We're going to be having an amazing guest speaker join us on June 13th. That's going to be Saturday, June 13th for that event. That speaker will be Mr. Greg Nicholas. He's the Housing Policy Specialist, team lead for all accessory dwelling units for the entire state of California, specifically for the Department of Housing and Community Development. He is the guy to be able to answer any of your very specific questions regarding the ADU laws in your neighborhood. So make sure to be on the lookout for that invite as well. Now, I would like to open it up for questions. Let's see here. First one, John, this one's going to be for you. What is the ballpark cost for the modular ADU to be at ground level subterranean for easy access?
Well, when you're dealing with subterranean, or what we call in the industry a pit set, it means you got to dig a hole in the ground, and then you're kind of challenged with a variety of issues. One being the added costs for shoring up the pit that you're setting it in or on, which means you're going to be investing money in a load-bearing stem wall, which you have to do anyway when you're setting a modular. You're still going to be dealing with that, even if it's above ground. But it's a little bit more costly to go below ground and do the same thing. The most critical and important thing to consider is drainage. I can't tell you how many plan unit developments scattered all over the county or all over the state have been done since the 80s, where they put all these, I mean, hundreds, maybe thousands of homes on a pit set type of an installation, and they didn't provide for any drainage. I mean, frankly, that put a couple of my kids through college, because we developed a drainage mitigation program that we implemented that ended up costing homeowners thousands of dollars, but it got the water out from underneath the homes. The whole idea with drainage is catch and diversion, and basically that's what we had to do. But we couldn't do it outside the home because everything was already built up around it. You already had landscape, concrete slabs, garages, awnings, carports. You couldn't get near where the water was. So we had to go under the home and dig out from under the home all the way around the perimeter of the stem wall, lead the water to the street if that was possible. If it wasn't possible, then we had to install, and you, the homeowner, had to maintain a drain. I mean, a dedicated sump pump with a dedicated electrical outlet. It really complicates things. So keep all those in mind.
John, you're giving me nightmares. One of my jobs in college in summer was installing the drain tile in those sump pumps, and it was probably one of the hardest jobs I've ever done in my life. So I feel for you. So next we've got, this looks like a question for me. Is there a loan limit for the HECM loan? So that's a good question. So remember folks, there's two different types of loans. The HECM loan that we've been discussing in this program, we have a maximum home value limit of $765,600. So they base all of the loan to values on that $765,600 limit. And it doesn't matter in that case if your home appraises for $1 over that, or $100,000 or $1 million over that. They still use the value of $765,600. Now, speaking of a home appraising for over $1 million over that, let's say you have a home that's worth $1.7 million. In that case, what I would recommend looking at is some of the proprietary reverse mortgage products. They're written the exact same way that the FHA stuff is. They're still non-recourse. They just give you the ability to access much more value in your home when you have one of the higher end value homes. Now, using that kind of home like that could potentially open it up to be able to do 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 ADUs all at once. And that's just simply by leveraging your primary residence in order to build more ADUs on your rental properties.
Well, let me interject something else there too that's I think important to note. Um, with the median in price for a home in San Diego County, where it is, you're going to find most homes are valued way over the limits that Jeremy was just describing. So that's real important information.
Yeah, that's correct. And I also want you to keep in mind, folks, this is not just for people that have a paid off house. We've done this for people that have, a house worth $700,000-800,000, and they might owe 100 or 150 or $200,000 on their current traditional mortgage where they're making a mortgage payment. The benefit in doing this HECM loan is that we use the HECM loan to pay off their traditional financing. Now their mortgage payment requirement is $0. They never have to make a mortgage payment on it. And they still have access to a line of credit of $150,000 or $180,000 to go build that ADU. Now you're talking about basically going both sides of that spectrum, from getting rid of that mortgage payment that's $1,500 to $2,000, and then adding an additional nearly $2,000 or more in rent, depending on the size of the ADU that you build. You literally just gave yourself nearly $4,000 in extra cash flow every month. That is a life-changing experience when you're on fixed income. Here's a question. It looks like this one is for me and John. So do you have to build the ADU on your primary residence if I have a HECM loan? That's a good question. So no, you don't. In fact, you can use the proceeds from the HECM loan anywhere you want. So as much as we'd love you to build in San Diego, if you have a second home in Colorado, you can do your HECM loan on your primary residence here in San Diego and do a loan anywhere. It doesn't matter. We can do HECM loans across the whole entire state of California. And John has phenomenal relationships and contacts with folks. If you're looking for building an ADU outside of San Diego, he's a wonderful resource. So don't be afraid to pick up the phone and call him about that.
Well, let me also add, even as important, if not more importantly, that you can, let's say you wanted to live closer to your family and you wanted to rent out your primary residence and use your proceeds to build an ADU on your daughter or your son's property. There's a lot of that going on as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so my suggestion is that. So keep in mind, folks, in order to take advantage of the HECM loan, the home has to be your primary residence. However, the workaround with that is you build an ADU on your primary residence. You can move into the ADU, you rent out your main house, and then you build an additional ADU on your kid's house. Now, you might be building a studio or a one bedroom, but you get the best of both worlds. You get to rent out the main house for much more cash flow. You have a brand new, most likely ADA compliant ADU built, and it's stunning. And then you get to build an ADU in your on your kids or grandkids' property, and you can go back and forth. And the thing with HECM loans is, in order to keep it your primary residence, you have to live there. You can't be gone more than 12 months and 1 day. So you could spend 3 months here, 3 months there, 2 months here, a month there, back and forth as much as you want.
Build yourself a bunch of guest homes all over the place.
Absolutely. And
I got a question for you, Jeremy.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Let's say you had a piece of property down in Mexico. Could you take those proceeds and build something down in Mexico?
So they don't limit where you spend the proceeds. I mean, nobody's following you around asking you, what did you do with that money? I mean, I've had people literally take these loans and buy an RV. I've had people take these loans and say, you know what, our dream has been to take cruises and we've never been able to afford to. And they just start going on cruises. They go, we're going to go once a quarter or once every 6 months. Or, it just really just depends. I mean, I had a client that bought an RV. The older gentleman was working and he was 70. His wife was 60. He wanted to work for 5 more years to be able to afford, because they were still making a payment, to be able to afford to pay down their mortgage low enough to refinance it, to free up the cash so that they could go start traveling. And my question is, how much more difficult is traveling and camping going to be when you're 75 versus 70? And
yeah, tell me about it.
Yeah, John, you're 75. I mean, I'm 42. Every time I get up in the morning, my knees creak a little more, my back hurts a little more, and it's never going away. It's I'm gonna sound like bubble wrap by the time I'm 50. So it's just, that was the question I proposed, and his answer was, I'm in. This is amazing. And so I got him a HECM loan. He got to pay off his traditional mortgage. He got rid of his mortgage payment. He had enough money to buy an RV, and he and his wife, now because his wife was 60, we did the non-borrowing spouse. So about a year and a half later, she turned 62. We refinanced it. got him access to an even bigger line of credit, got her added on the loan, and then we actually just closed them again for the third time in 3.5 years. We took their line of credit this last time from $22,000 up to nearly $100,000 because of an increase in value, a decrease in rates, and an increase in available equity to them. So these products are just absolutely incredible for the way they open up a complete lifestyle to folks that would otherwise normally never be able to have access to it. And that's the whole purpose of this stuff is you work your whole life, take advantage of it. You know, now you've got the time, you need the resources and the capital to be able to do these things. And this is the solution.
Sign me up.
I will.
I'm taking a road trip in September. We're going to be gone for 6 weeks, and I want to do some cruises too.
Perfect. Let's do it. All right, folks. Well, that takes us right up to 10:30. Thank you so much for joining us. Make sure you're on the lookout for the next invite for Saturday, and make sure you're on the lookout for that June 13th invite for Mr. Greg Nicholas. We look forward to seeing you then.